Okay, last as we're getting ready to get started here, I want to make sure everybody's aware of our Facebook group. We've talked about this for many weeks, and we are on the precipice of passing 400 members of the Facebook community group. So right there at the top of my screen is a link to facebook.com/groups/evidence management. And if you are not a member of that group, but you're a Facebook user, hop in there and become a member of the Facebook group. It is where you can communicate with 400 other people that are in your field. And so we have questions being posted on there frequently. It puts you in direct contact with people that are in your industry. And so that's the entire purpose of that community group, is to just simply give you an outlet to communicate with other people that are in your area. Also want to point out the free online training that I believe is almost halfway over at this point. But if you're unaware of the evidencemanagement.com site and the free training that's being offered, it's I want to say 8-week training course. I'm going to assume it's 8 weeks, but on the Facebook community group that I just mentioned a moment ago, we have links to all the previous videos. So if you're interested, don't worry, it's not too late. You can still hop in and be a part of that, because all of the webinars that have been recorded and posted inside of the community group. All right, well, it looks like we've got the bulk of the people I'm expecting here today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to webinar 15, I believe this is. This is the 15th webinar in our weekly webinar series. Whole thing started with the COVID outset. We decided let's try to do something different in today's world and environment, where we're going to bring training and topics and things we think you're going to find interesting directly to you. And while people are locked down, and I'm assuming people are starting to get out of being locked down, depending on what state you're in Kentucky, things are starting to loosen up a little bit. But I do know that there are people out there that are in states that are not loosening up. So hopefully you're getting close to things getting back a little closer to normal. But for this moment in time, we're going to continue doing these webinars. People are showing up. We enjoy doing them. And so we're going to keep doing that. So with that, let's get into today's topic. It is titled "To Catch a Thief." And I'd like to welcome to our webinar, everybody sees her on the screen there, Beth Bennett. Beth, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Excellent, wonderful. Welcome, thank you for being here today. So I'm going to let Beth in just a moment here tell you a little bit about herself, but I've known Beth for a very, very long time. She worked with the Raytown Police Department for many years, and a couple of years ago started working for Tracker Products. And I've known a little bit about her story, but she was recently in a position where she was telling us a little bit about what we're going to discuss here today. And we asked her to come on and let's talk about this topic of what happens when, in her case, somebody starts stealing drugs and jewelry, and her experience and finding that out and going through the process. So I'm going to start letting Beth talk at this point. So Beth, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So my name is Beth Bennett, and I am from Kansas City, Missouri. Born and raised. I went to the University of Missouri, Columbia, graduated in 2005 with a BA in psychology and biology. Right now I live at home with my kiddos and my husband. He's a State Farm agent here locally. And then we have, like I said, 4 kiddos. They're 5, 7, 9, and 11. So this homeschooling pandemic thing has been quite interesting for us to try to both work full time, run a small business, and homeschool 4 kiddos. So it's been rewarding and very challenging. But growing up, I always knew I wanted to be, do something within the criminal justice system. As a little girl, I always wanted to be a homicide detective. But as I grew up and realized that I am scared of the dark and scared of guns, I realized that I needed to find something a little different, because I would never be able to be a police officer. And so then I was interested in crime scene and then also evidence. So that's kind of how I got started. I worked for the county. I was friends with somebody that was friends with the sheriff at the time, and he was kind enough to give me an internship while I worked in college, or was in college, I guess, and then hired me on as an intern until I was able to find a full-time job. So I started with Raytown back in July of 2006, I believe, and I ran their property and supply room. So I was in charge of all the evidence plus all the supplies. So office supplies, evidence supplies, the uniforms, the equipment, duty gear, all of that for 13 years. And then, like Ben had said, I had, they didn't have a barcoding system at Raytown before me. And so I'd done all the research back, in 2007, 2008, and we landed with Tracker. And so that's when I met Ben and Tracker Products, and I'd always had a good relationship. And so when our agency, when Raytown was going through the process of upgrading to Safe, that's when Ben and I kind of discussed me coming over, and I came over to Tracker in October of 2018, I believe, and have been here since. Couldn't love it more. I get to work from home, which I love. I just am loving what I get to do. I work in supply. So that's a little bit of a backstory for me. And like Ben said, we talked today or at some point about kind of what I went through, and as far as encountering somebody that had stolen drugs and jewelry from my property room. And so that's kind of why we're doing this today, and kind of showing you all what I learned from that. I can't hear you, Ben.
I'm sorry, I was muted because there's some background noise. I said, I'm interested in the psychology behind being a little girl wanting to be a homicide detective. I mean, do you think that, like,
Ever since I was
work?
little, I mean, that was, yes, that's all I remember. I always wanted that. So, yes.
Beth, I did not know that. That's the first time you've ever shared that. Like, you explained a lot of stuff here today. So I think I like you and I have made a lot of progress on understanding each other now. So let you continue your story.
Okay. So this all happened back in 2013, I believe. So I'd been in the property room, running that property room there at Raytown for about 6.5 years. And so at that time is when I was kind of faced with a friend. He was my friend and a coworker that, what we learned was stealing drugs and jewelry from the property room. And so that was, it was a really hard thing to face and to move on, but we learned a lot from it, which was great. And so that's kind of what I'll discuss today. So how it all happened was I had returned from maternity leave, and luckily they let the girl that filled in for me while I was gone, they let her stay on and work with me for a little bit. So that was, starting, I think I came back in January, and almost immediately this detective started checking out, an above average amount of items. And, at first I just didn't really notice anything. And this whole process, this went over 1 to 2 months. So it's really not a huge time frame. But he was just coming in pretty often and checking things out. I would say that through this, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but he was kind of grooming me. I know that anybody that works in the property room, our biggest struggle is disposals, getting officers and detectives to fill out disposals. So that's something that he was so kind in helping me with. He was not only filling out his disposals, but he was filling out other people's disposals, some for people that didn't work there, some for detectives that just weren't doing those. And I mean, and that won me over. I just thought he was just being so nice. And he was also doing things like, bringing in like food. And I know it sounds so tacky now, but I didn't see it at the time. But my coworker that was working with me, once I kept giving her more and more information, she just kept saying, it's almost like he was grooming you. He was manipulating you. And now looking back, I can see that. But in the moment, I just thought he was being nice and he was being my friend. And so what he was doing is he was checking out pills and then also jewelry. And with the jewelry, he was saying that he was going to, try to find the owners. He was taking pictures, which I just thought was so kind. And then also we run a citizens academy there. And so he was, having to speak at that, and that he was saying he was taking pictures for the presentation. So again, I mean, I was believing everything he said. I would say that the red flags kind of started with the pills. Even though he was checking out jewelry, honestly, that completely went over my head. It wasn't until the investigation had already started that I was able to look back and realize, oh, like that whole time he was stealing the jewelry too. But it was the pills that were kind of a red flag for me. I'd recently had a friend that was struggling with a pill addiction. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind. But then also, as property people, we are trained that, pills are something to look for. And then not only that, when you have somebody that is checking items out at a frequency that isn't normal, that is a red flag. And so all these little things started happening that my instincts were telling me that something probably wasn't right. I would say that the first thing where I'm like, okay, something really weird is happening, and this is where I think that I started documenting, was he had checked items out. And I know personally for me, whenever I check items out, I always count the bags. So I think it was maybe 7 bags that he had checked out, or maybe 6, I can't remember. But I always, before I give it to them, count the amount of bags. I mean, I've scanned everything and looked at everything, but I specifically always count the bags also. And whenever he went to bring them back to me, I counted the bags and there was an extra bag, which I thought was very odd. So I immediately started looking at the bags, and, he was standing over my head and could kind of tell something was going on, I think. But I noticed that 2 of the bags looked identical to each other, said the same thing, had the same item number. To which he immediately grabbed all the bags and said, oh, I was packaging another case. Like, sorry, I got these mixed up, and left my office with the items. When he came back, of course, miraculously, there's only the correct number of bags that there should be. So that was the really big red flag for me, that I'm like, okay, something weird is going on. I need to start documenting this. And so I did. Again, like I said, the frequency of his checkouts was a little bit odd. And so that led me to be a little bit suspicious. I began to kind of bounce my ideas off my coworker to get her thoughts. And honestly, she didn't really even like the guy. Lately, his mood had kind of changed. He'd, done some weird things to some of the officers that he used to be friends with. And it just, again, looking back now, it kind of all makes sense. But in the time, he was being so nice to me and doing all these nice things for me that I didn't really see that. But she saw right through it. She didn't like him and said something's up, and, you need to tell somebody. At the time, though, I still was just too scared to tell anybody. I didn't feel like I had enough information. Another thing that kind of set off a red flag is he started to check out items that were set for destruction, which I thought was really odd. He checked out a couple items, he said, for court, but they were already set to be destroyed. And I just, after having the bag episode, I thought that was really odd. And so I immediately contacted the prosecutor and also the case officer, because he was not the case officer for that case, which both told me, no, they had not requested that evidence for court. Still this time, I hadn't told anybody besides, my coworker, my suspicions. And even with the prosecutor, I didn't really say anything. I just, out of fear for, I guess the backlash that I might get if my suspicions were wrong. And then the last straw, I would say, was he started asking to check out gift cards that were set for destruction. And I just thought that was so odd. He used the excuse like he wanted to take pictures and things like that. But I said, there's no reason for that. At that point, I said, I'm not pulling anything out of destruction, because the way we had everything separated, we put everything into different piles, trash, shred, all those different things, that it was a lot of work to get the stuff pulled out of where it's set for destruction. So I just said no, and he easily gave it up. He was like, oh, okay, I guess I don't need it then. And so that's when, I again am still speaking with my coworker that she was able to convince me. So with that, I just was very scared of being ostracized by my other coworkers. With him being a detective, he'd been there for 10 years. Um, I just was at fear for what was going to come next, because I knew if I said something about drugs, an IA was going to start immediately, whether my suspicions were correct or not. And like I said, he was my friend, so I was scared to make him mad. But what the coworker had said to me is that if I didn't speak up, that then if something continues to happen, that it's going to be on me. And so finally, she was able to convince me, and I was able to go to my supervisor. So at that point, I brought I'd been documenting everything, and I contacted my lieutenant. He came to my office immediately. I spoke with him. um, I'm guessing immediately he went to the captain and the chief and told them, to which they approached the detective. And from what I understand, he started, divulging some of the information, which, they kind of wanted him to stop before attorneys and things like that got involved, but they had requested a drug test, to which he denied, and he quit right there on the spot and left the department. Um, so at that time, the IA had started, and I was interviewed. There was lots of things that they were starting to go through, but he stopped cooperating. So since he had quit and he stopped cooperating, the department decided to contact the highway patrol. And at that time, I mean, I think it was within a day or so, the highway patrol came in and took over all the investigations. So they did all the interviews. And again, I don't believe that he was cooperating with them either. But they went through and pretty much did all the same checks that IA had done, came in and checked out all the evidence, looked at the things. He had forged his other people's names on bags, all sorts of stuff that they had found out. Sorry, I have kind of my notes here. So what they discovered was that at his desk in the detective's office, his desk was full of pills and jewelry. So he had been keeping over-the-counter pills and just, knockoff jewelry in his desk. And as he was checking these things out, he was replacing them and doing it right there in the detective unit, where there was, probably 8 cubicles. Everybody else was in there, but nobody had any idea that's what he was doing. The big thing is also he knew the computer system, which was a really nice thing for me, again, because nobody ever really wanted to use, the computer system. And he knew how to use it great. He didn't have to come to me with all sorts of questions, but he knew exactly what to look for. So he was searching for items that were, in the descriptions, they were in containers. Like, he knew exactly what to pull because he'd been searching the computer system looking for, what he wanted. So his go-to was items, like I said, stored within boxes. So the jewelry, like if it was a watch within a watch box, or pills within the pill bottle, all sorts of pills mixed in. Obviously, what he was searching for was oxy and hydrocodone. Those were his 2 big pills that he was stealing. For the items that he was checking out, saying that he was photographing, I mean, he was getting away with opening the bags and resealing them because he had a legitimate reason to unpackage them. So the fact that, he had opened them up and resealed was not, a red flag. That wasn't a red flag to me. However, what he was also doing for the items that he shouldn't have been opening is, like in the one case that I mentioned earlier, he was replicating the bags and forging the other people, the other officer's signature on them. And so that way it looked exactly like what the original bag had looked like. And then he was throwing away the originals. So what we found out was that his pill supply had been taken away. I believe that his wife had found out about this and had gotten rid of all of his pills, so he was desperate. And he'd been stealing, like I said, the jewelry also, which the jewelry at the time completely went over my head. It wasn't until we started doing this investigation that I realized, oh, he was stealing jewelry too. The whole time I just thought it was the drugs. I mean, I knew he was checking out the jewelry, but it wasn't until the investigations all started that I realized that he was taking that also. The sad thing is that his addiction had come from a workplace injury. He'd been injured on the job years before, and since then had been addicted to these drugs. And then, like I said, he only stole drugs and jewelry that were not packaged or documented well. He knew exactly what he was going for, and he was really good at what he did. So as far as the charges and sentences, unfortunately with the jewelry, since we didn't have the jewelry as documented as, you know, we probably should have, the values, things like that, we weren't able to charge felony for the jewelry because we couldn't prove the value of it in order to make it a felony. So, you know, that's something that we learned. But he was charged with C felonies for the drugs. In the end, he got, I think it was suspended execution of sentence. So it's still on his record. But the odd thing is somehow, I don't know that his, you know, profile or whatever ever was updated, because we've recently learned that the ATF is after him and that he's been selling firearms online. So he was able to purchase all these firearms and has now been selling them online because the background checks didn't show that he was charged with a felony. And so that's what's really sad. You know, he needs help, but he never spent any time in prison. It was just parole and then that SES as far as the felony charges. So anyways, that's the story, I guess. Ben, do you have any questions or anything about the story? And then I can kind of circle back to some of the stuff I learned.
No, and I think what we'll do for everybody else is I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I haven't had any questions come in yet, but we'll circle back. If anybody does submit questions, go ahead and throw those in there, and then I'll come back at the end and we can just sort of pick those up.
Okay. So I would say that the red flags that, you know, I want to have everybody learn from, you know, our mistake or, you know, our experience is the fact that he was checking out lots of pill evidence. So that was a big red flag. Also checking out items at an above average rate. So, you know, in my training, I'd learned that if one officer is checking out items more frequently than, you know, all other officers combined, like that's a red flag. And that's one of the things that I had seen. Also, like I was able to determine that he was, you know, trying to check in more evidence than he checked out, which, you know, I was able to figure that out and notice that because I had been counting the bags. So that's something that I would, you know, strongly recommend. Checking items out for destruction. I mean, that's just not normal. You shouldn't, once it's set for destruction, there should be no reason that you need to check that out. And then also checking out items for court that aren't your cases. So that was another big red flag. And then, like I said, his mood changes. You know, looking back, we can see all those now, but at the time, I didn't really notice that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like the grooming that he did, again, in the time I just thought he was really being nice. Now I can see and look back and see that he was manipulating me. But the fact that he was completing all disposals, I mean, he knew exactly like my weak spot, because that is something that every officer and detective that I know of absolutely hates doing. And that's the hardest part with property people, is to get those disposals in. And so, I mean, he just had made my day by helping me with those. Just bringing in snacks, food, treats. You know, I feel silly now that I was manipulated that way, and I just thought he was my friend, but now I can understand. And the fact that he had me convinced that he was, you know, going above and beyond for the citizens with him, you know, trying to get this evidence returned as far as the jewelry, and then also taking pictures for this Citizens Academy that I just thought he was working so hard on, but he was actually just stealing. As far as what we changed and learned from this is we had new packaging requirements. So for pills, you were not able to package any pills within the pill bottles. The pill bottles could be in the evidence bag. It had to be a clear evidence bag, but the pill bottle had to be closed and empty. Pills, only like pills could be packaged together. And I mean, I wanted a very clear description. I wanted color, size, shape, markings, quantity, and I wanted to be able to see all of them and be able to count them. So that was huge. And of course, we got some grief from some of the officers and detectives at times, but for the most part, especially for the ones that were there during this whole process, they got it. They just, you know, would kind of chuckle and be like, you know, thank you to this officer or detective. but most of them understood. And then same thing with jewelry. No jewelry could be in like containers to where I couldn't see it. So, and if the containers, the watch boxes, things like that were too big, then they would need to be packaged separately, in clear evidence bags, empty. And then the jewelry had to be, only rings could be together, only bracelets could be together, only earrings, only like items could be together. We requested that they photograph. And so again, we were able to help out maybe with the value if this were to ever happen again, because we didn't have hardly any photographs of the jewelry we found when we were trying to go back and see what, was supposed to be there and what was not supposed to be there. And then as far as, just knowing, okay, items for destruction should never be checked out, that there needs to be a really good reason. And then same with items from court, those needed to come from the case officer. And, if you ever had questions, to double check and things like that. So we learned quite a bit from this. And, the second 6.5 years that I was there, we never had something like that happen again. This was the only instance I had in all my 13 years in the property room where we dealt with something like this. But the biggest thing is just trust your instincts and trust your training, because that's what it's there for.
Well, Beth, thank you for sharing that. I mean, first of all, that's, when you started sharing that story earlier, I was like, oh my goodness, like we've got to get this out there for people to hear about that. And by the way, I've got a lot of questions now. So now that people know, so I've got some questions that I do want to ask you, but I'm going to tell you ahead of time, and I'm sure you're good with this because I know you well enough. There's some hard questions in here. Like there are some things people genuinely want to understand. And so I know you well enough that you're not going to take that because I'm sure everybody here could imagine being in a situation where you just don't expect that. And everything you mentioned, all the things you went through, any one or two of those on their own would have been a great thing. Like, it's the totality of it. And I think the thing you said that everybody can sympathize with the most or empathize or whatever is that idea. If you make the wrong call, you got IA in, you got these people in your office, and now they're looking at you, and there is incredible pressure when it comes to something like that. And so the first question I want to throw out, and this was the one where the person said, hey, I'm not sure if you want to read this out, but I think it's a very, very valid question. And she said, I'm curious as to why your coworker waited for you to speak up. Sounds like she knew enough that she had saw the red flags. Why do you think she didn't say something?
I think that she didn't say anything because she hadn't been the one that experienced them. And she was a booking technician. So honestly, this was, I think, the first time she'd worked in the property room. So I trained her to kind of take over, but nobody really knew my position besides me. I'm sure most people have that same instance in their property rooms where it's pretty much just the property people understand what they're doing. So I don't think that, I think with her, I don't know. I think that, I was the one documenting it. He was dealing with me because she didn't like him, and he knew that. He didn't, I don't know that he liked her either. And so I think that it was just, I was the one that he had dealt and checked all these things out. That might have been part of the reason. And this wasn't over a huge time span either. Like I said, it was 1 to 2 months. But yeah, I mean, I can't speak for her, so I don't know. I don't feel like it necessarily was her place. I do feel like it was my place, but she was great to have as, she was great to be there for me, to have the support and to push me to do what in the end I knew I needed to do.
And I would almost suggest as much pressure as there was on you, she was in the proverbial lower position on the totem pole. That would have been even more out of the realm of thinking. And listen, I've never been in something like this, but I cannot imagine the pressure that is building up as you're recognizing these flags that are pouring in, and you get to the point where you're actually doing documentation at that point. It's not like, and so. All right, so let me get into just a couple of other ones that are in here. Any thoughts on how to obtain values of jewelry at the time of submission? How did you guys handle that, or did you?
No, I don't know. I mean, the Highway Patrol is who did the entire investigation. I don't know a good way to do that, because honestly, even when, you see people put values on drugs or any values on any items, it's kind of, to me, it's nonsense, because it's the officer's opinion. They're just putting what they believe that to, something to cost. And I would imagine for most other office or agencies, like for ours, a lot of times they would put $1 for every item.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is a good way to go about that. I'm not sure. And we never really came up with a good way besides, photographing as far as the values, because we just didn't even have that. We didn't have good photographs for most of the stuff that he had taken.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
Well,
I don't have a good answer.
you had talked about pictures, and I mean, I mean, you went from like no pictures to having pictures, which is, I mean, that's a significant step forward. I'm with you on the answer of how would you obtain values on that, because how would you? You're not going to take everything to a pawn shop and have them sit there and investigate every piece of
Right.
jewelry. So I think the answer to that is the pictures and thorough documentation. I love what you said about. I can imagine going from I just throw everything in a pill bottle in a bag to where I want colors, I want sizes, I want descriptions on them, and I also love. I mean, what you said. I don't love it. It's just it sort of bends my mind to think that after all of that, and that it was true, that people would even push back on something like that. But like that's just, that's just the world we live in, where when you ask somebody to do something extra, it gets that kind of pushback. But like, did you just look at it and tell them to shut up, or or were you nicer than
Like I said, typically it was the people that weren't there when it all went down. And
that?
so they didn't understand the enormity, I guess, of it all. The people that were there, I mean, like I said, we just kind of chuckled to ourselves and just kind of, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
But it's good practice, even though it took this to get to that, this is what we should have been doing all along. So,
Yeah.
we definitely learned some really good things from, having this happen
Yeah.
to us.
And I don't know that Sean is on here, but Sean from the Evidence Management Institute, like this is the kind of question I have now is like, I don't know if it's standard protocol, but why would you not go to that degree when it comes to drugs or drugs, guns, and money? I mean, like those are the three things. Why would you not require somebody to over elaborate what it is that they're submitting? That just seems like good policy. So maybe Sean, if Sean is on here, maybe he could post something in the question window as does EMI, do the standards or best, I'm sure best practices would dictate that level of a submission, but it would be interested in what his opinion is on that. So I'm sure he'll post something in here if he's somewhere out there. Let me see. So another good one that came in, and somebody asked a question, and I sort of feel like I can answer this too. The question was, how often do you suggest doing full audits or random audits or anything else? So let me let you speak, and then I'll jump in on that.
Okay. So again, from training, I learned that you need to be doing those annual inventories once a year, annual. But what I did also learn is that to be able to do that all at one time is just way too overwhelming, especially for us agencies that, you only have one full-time person in there and then maybe somebody part-time to help you. So I took the advice from my training and I split that up. So we did do annual inventories, but I split it up by my location. So I went through and figured out each, I wrote down every single location I had in my property room, which Ben, I really want to talk about locations now.
No,
But
not today. We're not doing
from
that
that,
now.
then I, determined how many items were in each location and then split it up by month based on, trying to get about the same amount of items inventoried each month. And then with that, I also, from training, learned that you should be doing the guns, drugs, and money 3 times a year. So within the year, as far as drugs, we just had so many that I did a full inventory of the drugs one of the times. But the other 2 times I would do a random audit. So I would do, 5 to 10%, but I'd look a lot deeper at the drugs, on those 2 times that I did the random audits. But then I also not only did the locations within the property room, but then in December, I would also inventory all my checked out items. So I would look into, because that's where a lot of items go missing over the years. What I'd found when I got into the property room and did a whole inventory, I'd found so many items that had been checked out years prior, and you go to the person and say, where is this? And they have no idea. They checked, they might have checked out a micro cassette tape,
Right.
to look at. And then, it's not like they intentionally misplaced it, but nobody ever came back to them to ask them to turn it back in. And so that's something that I always felt strongly that you needed to have, some sort of tickler file or something to be looking at your items checked out to. So I absolutely did inventories annually, split up by locations monthly. And then with those, every single month, I would send those up the chain. And so, and I had discrepancies. There is human error. Every single month, for the most part, there might have been a few discrepancies, but I loved that I was able to find those human mistakes each month, as opposed to when I needed it for court, and then I didn't know where it was in the property room. So, I mean, we absolutely did find small things where, something might have misplaced that has a similar package and the wrong location, but we knew exactly where to look for it, and it was easy to find it. So I was always able to send up the discrepancy report, as well as a report that I'd write up on every single location about all the discrepancies and how I was able to fix those.
Yeah. The thing I would add to this, though, this was not an audit or an inventory discrepancy problem. Like, just the packaging standards were like, you weren't going to catch that, because in doing a normal inventory, you're just running through and scanning everything, and
Yeah.
is it where it's supposed to be? But that's the importance of, like, that. That's why there's never one answer to fixing all of this. It is that with this, and so the change in the packaging is really what's important. And by the way, I got more questions rolling in. I knew this was going to happen today. This is really good. So let's try to pick up the pace on these so that I can get through them all, because I probably got 10 more questions waiting in the hole here. The next one is, what were the extra items that he was checking in?
So it was an empty bag. It was his bag that he had duplicated. It was just an empty bag that looked identical to another bag. But he had forgot to throw it away before he came back to me, and it was mixed in with the bags. So it wasn't anything in it. It was just empty.
Yeah, I would imagine one of the many red flags is when you said something and he picks everything up and walks away. Like, that has got to be like, what are you doing? So, and you also, I'm curious, because this was never, you didn't talk about this. You guys had cameras in your room. Was there any video evidence of any of this stuff after all of this came out?
No, and honestly, I don't know that we had cameras
Okay.
because all of this took place in the supply part. So my property room and supply, over the years, we put up a gate and then we put up a wall in between because of filtrations. So we have lots of cameras now in the property room, which we've always had some cameras in there, but there's a lot in there now. But all of this took place in the supply. Like, that's where my actual office was that I sat in. And so, no, there was no cameras.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Let me see here. Yeah. Okay. So I think some of these are just comments too. Okay, I gotta read this out. Somebody just put in here, I won't say names, but my senior property room tech is a witch. She doesn't have any friends at the PD. I now can appreciate that. So there we go. You know what, somebody else posted in here, and I totally agree with this. This is an understanding, and I'll just read what they put. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Were there any other changes, reforms you took the opportunity to push for, other than just packaging pills and jewelry? Is there anything else you can think of that sort of came out of this?
I don't know that it came out of that necessarily. I mean, over the years, you know, we made quite a few changes over the years. I mean, that's what I loved about going to the different trainings over my years, because it was like every single time I'd go to another training, it was kind of a pat on my back, the accomplishments that I'd made since
Yeah.
the previous training, which I loved, just seeing what I'd done. So, I mean, I was constantly, little by little, making changes over the years. So when I first got there, I was sitting, and I think even, I don't even, I have 4 kids. I can't remember how many kids I had before they even put in a filtration system.
Yeah.
So it was little by little, I kind of giving them more and more information that, hey, what I'm sitting in daily is not safe, because people would come in and, smell the drugs, and I couldn't smell them anymore. I did not know the smell of marijuana. So little by little, we made a lot of progress there at Raytown that I'm proud of. But as far as changes more from this instance, besides, changing the packaging and things like that, I can't remember what other big changes that we could like credit just to that.
Yeah. And by the way, Sean has messaged me. Sean, I'm texting Sean, so I don't know if he's in position to pop on here. I'd love to ask him a question. So Sean may be popping on here. I just need to know if he's available to pop on. He said it was his motorcycle day, so he could be in Bandam. I don't know what we're welcoming in, so that's why I'm a little worried about what I'm inviting on here. Beth and I have obviously done so much prep work. We're trying to keep the standard up around here. So, all right, I'll roll on to the next question, and Sean can message me back if he's out there somewhere. The next question was he checking out jewelry without owners, or had owners that actually could have been returned to the owner, or were they items that actually could have been returned?
Honestly, I don't remember. I don't remember looking into that or checking that.
I'm sure he didn't care. He just wanted the jewelry, and he was looking for jewelry that was available to be gotten. It didn't matter if there was an owner.
Yeah, he knew exactly. Like I said, he'd done his research, and he knew exactly which items to check out, cases to check out based on the descriptions, the item descriptions. But yeah, I don't remember as far as the owners. I didn't really go and research whether they had owner. I trusted him. He was my friend.
Yeah.
He'd been there for 10 years. I trusted him.
Yeah. Listen, man, I understand exactly what you're saying. You get in that position where you just trust someone or trust a situation and you just don't expect it. Oh man.
You said pop on.
Now we got a drug expert. We found a guy on the street that is clearly involved in drugs, and listen, this is awesome. This is how we roll around here. This is my first ever phone a friend. And so Sean, I appreciate you hopping on here. I don't even know what to say. I do know that I don't know where to go from here. So welcome.
Well, I would have dressed differently had I known. But first, Beth, thank you. I mean, for me, this is the kind of thing that people can learn from. I mean, this is something that has incredible value as a teaching tool. I mean, there's just so many things that you can learn from it. And quite honestly, you're talking about things that I didn't even think about, the whole grooming aspect. I mean, it makes absolute perfect sense to me that if you have an officer that is trying to help you with dispositions, that's someone that you're gonna gravitate to, because quite honestly, that's pretty rare. But I'll just answer any questions that pop on, and I didn't even check my camera angle. But
listen, you're all right. It's not going to get any better. Don't touch anything. Just leave everything where it's at. Sean and I, we get along well together, so this is great. But so the question I had, Sean, is I don't know if you heard Beth talking about it earlier, but one of the things that came out of this was their packaging standards. And so they went from, you could have a bottle of pills and you just throw it in there and the label just says bottle of pills. Well, after something like this, it now becomes, we don't package anything in the bottle. You have to put it in a clear bag where it can be seen. And like to the degree of write out the count of the pills. I want descriptions. I want colors. I want everything else. And my question to you is, in your teaching of how to do this, do you teach to go to that degree?
Absolutely. And I think that we learn everything that we learn in evidence management from experiences like this one. I think if you look on our website, if you'll read through our standards and best practices, I mean, every single standard and every single best practice that we recommend, everything that we teach in our training classes is because of situations like this. We do these things, and hopefully we can teach people to do it on the front end so that they aren't victimized by someone like this and your agency doesn't have to go through anything like this. But that's why we teach packaging the way we teach packaging, and we teach drug procedures and disposition procedures the way we do, specifically because people like this exist and they're going to gain our trust, they're going to gain our confidence, and there's a very real apprehension. I mean, I know Beth, and I know that she was trying to really do the right thing. I mean, she's a property custodian that was really trying to go to class, go to training, get things done the right way, but still you can try to do everything right and still things can sneak up on you. So
Well, that's good. And I'm curious, you know what I'm interested in? This is the first time I've done this. I'd like to have feedback from anybody. Just somebody put in the question, if you've heard this and you're going to change your drug packaging standards, or at least to go back and look at it, I'd love to hear from somebody, just for somebody to say, you know what? Right now, I do it that way, where it's just slapping a thing, and now because of something like this, we're going to change that. So I'd be interested if anybody out there would say that, and I'll go into some other questions. And John, you can certainly hang out. We're coming down to the end, but if there's anything that we have for you, we'll throw it out there. Next question is, do you keep your disposition items in a high security area, or did you?
No, we didn't. It's same area. I mean, it's in our property room. We just have one, property room, if you will, that's all gated and secure. Just the only people that have access was me and then, my coworker at the time. But I keep it like on a separate shelf. But as far as was that an extra security? No. Like I was saying to some of our employees or coworkers earlier, but as far as like once it goes to destruction, like once the drugs and the firearms are ready to go destruction, so we don't pull firearms, drugs, or money until it's ready. So it's only the other items that are set to the side. So everything else stays, like the drugs that are set for destruction stay with all the drugs until we're ready to burn them. And at that time, two people pull them together. We, sign off on them. They go into a barrel. The barrel is sealed, taped, it's secure, and then it's not opened until those same two people are at the burn site and dumping it in. And so that's kind of how we do the same thing with the guns. They go into a big barrel that the two witnesses are there signing off on them as they're going in, verifying it's the right one. And then once, you're ready to throw them into the metal recycling, the barrel is, opened up, if you will. And then with money, I send it. Most of our money was in bank accounts. And so the finance department would cut the check to the state when we would send money to unclaimed property. So everything would go through finance at that point. If it was still in the safe, it would have to be deposited by our finance department. So then they could write the, one check to go to unclaimed property.
Yeah. By the way, I do want to throw a plug here real quick that this has been fantastic today, Beth. I really felt like going into this had the potential of being the best one of these that we've done, because people just eat this up. I mean, this is a story. This is what really happened. And I just want to throw it out we've got 100-something people that are on here watching right now. There is incredible value to sharing these stories. And Beth, that's what I love, is you're not too worried about this, but there are people that, because this happened to them, because they were manipulated, because they thought, you're saying some things that are really difficult to say out loud. And there are people that probably wouldn't want to share that they were on the butt end of that experience. And the only thing I would suggest to other people watching is, if you've got a story like this, if it was something else, because somebody has already posted on here, somebody has said, I'm now going to go back and I'm going to require for drugs, I'm going to get the shape, the color, the imprint, the quantity, the packaging, the layout. Like, change has been made here. I mean, and that's good. So that is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. And what I would suggest is, if there's anybody else watching that would be willing to come on and do one of these, we would love to put that out there. It is helpful to people. And so please, if you're thinking of something or you got a story to share, please just put something in the question window and let me know. I'd love to at least talk to you about how this works, because these aren't complicated. We just set up a camera and get Beth on and just let her start talking, or him, or whoever it may be. So another question was, the detective, did he work different kind of cases? I mean, or was he a specific type of case person?
I can't remember. They switched around so often. I don't remember what he was working at the time. But he'd been there 10 years, and I think he'd been in the detective unit for a while. But yeah, it's not a big department. And so there was probably, maybe 6, 7 at the most detectives at the time. So, yes, he might have kind of been somewhat specific, but he probably had, a variety of other cases also.
Yeah, just to throw out something somebody else, this was just a comment somebody made, but they said, we have a burn room that holds drug evidence that's been approved for destruction. This is making me rethink that idea. We may go with Beth's procedure of not pulling until ready to do destruction.
Yeah, and that way for me, those items were still in all the inventories. So up until, and we didn't pull it months in advance either. We would pull it within a day or so, sometimes the day of, otherwise, within a day or two of the destruction.
Yeah.
So that way those inventories, all those items were still in the inventories.
Sean, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, we recommend, or we teach, when we teach dispositions, we teach that the disposal processing stuff that should be done in a high security area. I mean, you need higher security than just regular evidence storage for disposition processing and dispositions just generally. But that's a great alternative. If you're not pulling the stuff until you're doing dispositions in real time, that's an alternative. But what you don't want is one single area where all of the stuff that you're going to throw away that everyone knows is not evidence and not useful anymore for a criminal action to be setting in one location, or found property that you know is already off the books. Those are terrible practices. Just in time or real time disposition pulling is a suitable alternative. We recommend, a disposition proposal or disposal kind of storage area, higher security area for storage. The one thing I would like to just pop on and just reiterate and underscore, and it goes along with Beth and the drug identification issue, is there are two words that we need to just extirpate, remove entirely from the vocabulary of law enforcement. That's various and miscellaneous.
Yes.
Because I promise you, in every property room or in every agency, I would venture to say, unless you've already been bitten by this, you've got officers that submit various white pills or miscellaneous. Well, we're not responsible for miscellaneous or various as evidence custodians. We are responsible specifically for the actual item that's going in. So if we could remove those two words, I mean, if you do nothing else today, but just start there, just stop allowing the use of miscellaneous or various, you're going to go a very long ways in having a more secure evidence room.
Could not agree more.
Another side note, somebody asked, they want the recording of this so that they can take it to their boss and show it to them. So this video that we're doing here today will be posted either later today or tomorrow morning on the evidence management Facebook page. But if you don't have Facebook, it's also going to be on our YouTube channel. So if you don't know where those are at, go to trackerproducts.com, and at the very bottom of that page, we have links to all of these different ways so that you can get all of these videos. We want that information out there. We want you to share these links and send them to other people. So very good. We're down to the last couple of minutes, and I've got one more question in here. And so if you've got any thoughts, now's the time to get it in here at the very last. And nobody has submitted yet that they're ready to hop on and tell their story about something like this. I'd really, really love it if somebody would say, I've got a story I'd like to share for the benefit of everybody else. That's the only reason we're doing this, is because this benefits other people. And so please jump in there. But somebody asked a question of all the things you learned. Okay, so now take a moment and think of all the different things that you learned within this process. Is there any one that you would say, this is the biggest lesson I learned?
Trust your instincts. I mean, and your training. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, I almost immediately felt, this doesn't seem right, but I just was too scared to come forward for a while. But I would say trust your instincts and trust your training.
Yeah. By the way, if anybody wants to know why I'm laughing, I've got people that like to text me because I'm sitting here. Beth is one that does that, by the way. So Beth is on here and can't do it today. But I'm sitting here trying to discuss a serious topic and be serious about it. And I've got people texting me things, and it takes me out of the loop. And I'm sitting here laughing, and Beth's pouring her heart out. And I'm not laughing at you, Beth. I just want you to know, people that act like you are sitting here texting me things that are just funny. And then Sean shows up, and he's been out on a motorcycle ride. I mean, it's just, this is great. It's all good. I love doing this because this would be better than the stodgy, everybody shows up with their suits on and nobody can understand what we're even talking about. I mean, these are normal people. This is what we're dealing with. Or we're not normal people, maybe that.
Just for the record, I normally wear a tie. So
yeah, you do.
If you see me and you're going to come to one of our training classes, I normally am much more polished. I don't look like the guy that eats out of trash cans. So
I was going to say, I don't know that the boss would like people showing up to a seminar with a guy that looks like he's on the drugs. That would not be good. All right. I do have some people that have told me that they've got stories to share, but the bosses won't want them to share. So yes, that's always something that really it's fighting against that grain, because it's, people don't want that stuff out there. But hey, we're in a group of property and evidence people. This is not the local news reporters showing up. Although the minute I say that, we'll have news on here, and then all of a sudden I'll hear something crazy. So all right, well, we're almost at the 3 o'clock hour on the East Coast, and Beth, you're awesome. Thank you for getting on here and talking with us. Sean, thanks for hopping on. But Beth, thank you so much for your time. That was awesome today.
You're welcome.
All right, well, for everybody that came, we appreciate you being here, and we'll be back at it again next Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
See ya.